I danced with a man 20 years younger. And he whispered a proposal that changed everything. The moment his lips brushed against my ear on that dance floor. The words he whispered made my knees buckle and my heart stop beating for what felt like an eternity. I know who you really are, Catherine. I know what you did 17 years ago. And I'm going to need you to marry me. I pulled back, staring into the green eyes of a man I'd met barely 3 hours ago. A man young enough to be my son. And I saw something there that terrified me more than the secret I'd buried for nearly 2 decades. He wasn't bluffing. And somehow impossibly he was smiling like a man who'd just fallen in love. My name is Catherine Ellison. I'm 52 years old. I have long silky hair that's still naturally dark with a few silver threads I've earned, fair skin that people say looks a decade younger than my years, and a figure I've maintained through discipline and sheer stubbornness. I'm the founder and CEO of Ellison Architecture, a firm responsible for designing some of the most iconic residential spaces on the Eastern Seaboard. I'm intelligent. I'm determined. I've built an empire from nothing. And 17 years ago, I made a choice that destroyed someone's life. A choice I've been running from ever since. A choice that was about to catch up with me in the most unexpected way imaginable. It started at my best friend's daughter's wedding reception at the Whitfield Estate in Connecticut. The kind of venue where old money whispers through the walls and the champagne costs more than most people's rent. I didn't want to be there. Weddings had become a particular kind of torture for me. A reminder of everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given up, everything I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve. But Diana Whitfield had been my college roommate, and her daughter Sophia had practically grown up calling me Aunt Catherine. So I put on my midnight blue gown, fastened the diamond earrings I'd bought myself for my 50th birthday, and drove 2 hours to celebrate a love I'd long stopped believing existed for me. The reception was in full swing when I arrived. A string quartet played something classical and lovely beneath a canopy of white roses and fairy lights. Couples swayed on the dance floor. Laughter floated through the warm June air like perfume. I found my seat, ordered a gin and tonic, and prepared to perform the role I'd perfected over the years. The successful independent woman who needed no one, who was complete on her own, who definitely wasn't dying of loneliness behind a smile that could light up boardrooms. You look like you're plotting an escape route. The voice came from my left. I turned and found myself looking at a man who had absolutely no business being that attractive. He was tall, early 30s, with an aesthetic build that suggested he lived in the gym but didn't make it his entire personality. Fair skin, sharp jaw, dark hair that fell just slightly over his forehead in a way that was either carefully styled or effortlessly perfect. His suit was well-tailored but not ostentatious. His eyes were green, the kind of green that reminded me of deep forests and dangerous things. I'm not plotting, I said. I've already identified 3 viable exits. Plotting implies I haven't finished. He laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. A woman who plans ahead. I respect that. He extended his hand. Ethan Cole. Friend of the groom. Catherine Ellison. Friend of the bride's mother. Ah. He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously flattered and exposed. The architect. Sophia talks about you constantly. She said you designed their first apartment. I consulted on it. There's a difference. She also said you'd be the most interesting person here tonight, and that I absolutely had to meet you. I raised an eyebrow. Did she also mention I'm old enough to have babysat you? She mentioned you'd say something exactly like that. He grinned, and there it was, that sharp, witty energy that radiated off him like heat. She also said you use sarcasm as a force field. Her words, not mine. Smart girl. She learned from the best. If you're already hooked on where this is going, hit that like button right now because this story is about to take turns you will never see coming. Ethan sat down next to me uninvited, which should have annoyed me but somehow didn't. He ordered bourbon neat, and we fell into conversation with an ease that unsettled me. He was a trauma surgeon at Yale New Haven Hospital, 32 years old. Brilliant, clearly, but he wore his intelligence lightly, wrapping serious observations in humor and deflection. I recognized the technique because I'd invented it. So why is a trauma surgeon at a wedding looking for escape routes? I asked. Who said I'm looking for escape routes? I came over here specifically to block yours. That's either charming or threatening. Can't it be both? I laughed despite myself. The djinn was warming my chest, and his attention was warming something deeper, something I'd kept frozen for years. I told myself to be careful. Men like Ethan Cole were dangerous not because they meant harm, but because they made you forget the walls you built. And my walls existed for very good reasons. We talked for an hour. Then 2. He told me about the patient he'd lost last week, a 19-year-old motorcycle accident, and how he'd sat in the hospital parking lot afterward and cried for 20 minutes before driving home. He told me this without shame, without performance, like vulnerability was simply part of being human, and he hadn't gotten the memo that men weren't supposed to admit that. I told him about the building I just designed in Newport, how I'd fought the city planning board for 18 months because they wanted to demolish a 100-year-old oak tree, and how I'd redesigned the entire foundation to save it. You redesigned a $40 million building for a tree, he said. It was a really good tree. Catherine Ellison, he said slowly, like he was tasting my name. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Honestly? Someone colder. Sophia warned me you keep people at arm's length. Sophia talks too much. Maybe. But she also said that once you let someone in, you're the most loyal, fiercely loving person she's ever known. He paused. I'd like to see that version of you. The directness of it stole my breath. I looked away toward the dance floor where Sophia and her new husband were swaying to something slow and beautiful, their foreheads touching, their eyes closed, completely lost in each other. My chest ached with something that felt dangerously close to longing. You don't know anything about me, I said quietly. I know you redesigned a building for a tree. That tells me everything I need to know. The DJ shifted from classical to something more contemporary, a slow, soulful melody that pulled couples from their seats like gravity. Ethan stood and extended his hand. Dance with me. I don't dance. You don't dance, or you don't want to dance with a man 20 years younger at a wedding full of people who'll talk about it? I looked at his outstretched hand, looked at his green eyes, looked at the 20 years between us stretching like a canyon I had no business crossing. Both, I said. And then I took his hand anyway. The moment we stepped onto the dance floor, something shifted. His hand found the small of my back with a confidence that shouldn't have been possible for someone his age. I was acutely aware of every point of contact, his palm against mine, his fingers pressing gently against my spine, the warmth of his chest close to mine. We moved together with a fluidity that surprised us both. You're a liar, he murmured. You absolutely dance. I said I don't. I didn't say I can't. Noted. What other things can you do that you claim you don't? That's a dangerous question. I'm a trauma surgeon. Danger is literally my job description. The song changed to something slower, deeper. He pulled me closer, and I let him because the djinn and the music and the fairy lights in his cologne were conspiring against every rational thought in my head. This was absurd. I was 52. He was 32. People were watching. Diana was watching from across the room with an expression that hovered between delighted and horrified. And then he leaned in, his lips brushing my ear, and he whispered those words that shattered everything. I know who you really are, Catherine. I know what you did 17 years ago. And I'm going to need you to marry me. I stopped moving. The world stopped moving. The music continued, but it sounded distant now, like I was hearing it from underwater. I pulled back and stared at him, searching his face for malice, for calculation, for the cold satisfaction of a trap sprung perfectly. But all I saw was sincerity, and something terrifying that looked like tenderness. Who are you? I whispered. Dance with me, he said. And I'll explain everything. But not here. Not where people can hear. My survival instinct screamed at me to walk away, to go to my car, drive home, call my lawyer. Instead, I stepped back into his arms. We danced, and he began to talk. 17 years ago, he said softly, you were approached by a man named Richard Hale. He wanted you to design a luxury development in Hartford, a complex that would require demolishing an entire neighborhood. 32 families would lose their homes. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't heard that name in years. Richard Hale. The man who'd offered me my first major contract, the one that would have launched my career a decade earlier than it actually launched. You said no, Ethan continued. But Hale didn't accept no. So he offered you something else. A partnership. A share of the profits. And when you still refused, he threatened to destroy you. He had photographs, Catherine. Photos from that weekend in Boston. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Nobody knew about Boston. Nobody. You still said no. But Hale built the development anyway with a different architect. And 2 years later, one of those buildings collapsed during a rainstorm because of structural negligence. 3 people died, including a 4-year-old boy named Marcus Webb. Stop, I breathed. You blamed yourself. Even though you didn't design it. Even though you'd refused. You blamed yourself because you thought if you'd agreed, if you'd been the architect, those buildings would have been safe. Those people would be alive. Tears were burning in my eyes now, and we were still swaying, still moving to music I could no longer hear. How do you know this? I managed. Because Marcus Webb was my cousin. If this story just made your jaw drop, you're going to want to subscribe right now because what happens next changes everything you think you know. The dance floor blurred. The fairy lights became smeared stars. I tried to pull away, but Ethan held me gently, firmly, not trapping me but anchoring me. Before you run, he said. Hear the rest. Please. I can't. You carried guilt for 17 years for something that was never your fault. I need you to hear why I'm here. I looked up at him through tears I couldn't stop. Are you here for revenge? The look on his face broke something inside me. Catherine, he said, and his voice cracked. I'm here because my Aunt Marcus's mother spent the last 3 years of her life trying to find you. Not to blame you. To thank you. The words didn't make sense. They bounced off the walls of my comprehension like foreign syllables. Thank me. You reported Hale to the State Engineering Board anonymously after the collapse. Your report was the reason his entire operation was investigated. Your testimony, given in secret with your identity protected, put him in prison. 8 families received settlements because of the case you helped build. My aunt was one of them. She wanted to thank me? She died 6 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. But before she died, she gave me a letter. And she asked me to find you. To give it to you. And to tell you that guilt you've been carrying, the guilt that's kept you alone, that's made you push every good thing away. That guilt was never yours to carry. I was crying openly now and I didn't care who saw. 2 decades of grief, of sleepless nights, of punishing myself by refusing love, refusing connection, refusing happiness because I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve it. All of it was pouring out of me on a dance floor in Connecticut in the arms of a man I'd met 3 hours ago. The letter is in my jacket pocket, Ethan said. But I'll give it to you later. Right now, I just need you to breathe. You said you wanted me to marry you. He smiled through what I realized were his own tears. I did say that. Admittedly, my timing could use work. Your timing is terrible. I'm better with a scalpel than a script. I laughed and it came out broken and wet and ugly, and he looked at me like it was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. The song ended. We stood on the dance floor still holding each other, while the world rearranged itself around us. Diana was definitely staring now. So was Sophia. So were at least 30 other guests. I didn't care. For the first time in 17 years, I didn't care about the watching eyes, the judgments, the calculations of age and propriety and what a woman my age was supposed to want. We left the dance floor and walked into the garden. The night air was cool and soft, carrying the scent of roses and freshly cut grass. We sat on a stone bench beneath an ancient magnolia tree, and Ethan pulled an envelope from his inside pocket. It was worn, handled many times. My name was written on the front in shaky handwriting. I opened it with trembling hands. Dear Catherine, it read. You don't know me, but I know you. I know that you said no to a powerful man when saying yes would have been easier. I know that after the worst day of my life, you worked in silence and shadow to bring justice for my son. I know that you have punished yourself for something that was never your sin. My boy Marcus was 4 years old. He loved dinosaurs and chocolate ice cream and he called every dog he saw puppy regardless of size. His death was the end of my world. But your courage gave me something to hold on to. You gave me justice. You gave me truth. And now I want to give you something in return: permission. Permission to forgive yourself. Permission to live. Permission to love. You deserve it, Catherine. More than anyone I've ever known. Love, Dorothy Webb. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest and sobbed. 17 years of walls came crashing down in the space of a breath, and Ethan sat beside me, not touching me, just present, giving me room to fall apart. How did you find me? I finally asked. Aunt Dorothy had a private investigator track you down years ago. She was too sick to approach you herself. She asked me to do it when the time was right. And you chose a wedding? I chose an evening where you might have your guard down, where music and candlelight might make you willing to listen to a stranger. He paused. I didn't plan on actually wanting to marry you. That part was improvised. You don't want to marry me. You don't know me. I know you redesigned a building for a tree. I know you sacrificed your career to protect 32 families. I know you've spent 17 years in a prison you built for yourself. He turned to face me. And I know that in 3 hours of conversation, you've made me laugh more than anyone has in years. You've listened to me talk about a patient I lost without flinching. And you've looked at me like I'm an actual human being, and not a collection of impressive credentials and a pretty face. I never said you had a pretty face. You didn't have to. You've been stealing glances at my jawline all night. I have not. Catherine, you literally touched my jaw during our second dance. I was adjusting your collar. My collar is nowhere near my jaw. I stared at him, this impossible, infuriating, beautiful man who had just detonated every defense I'd ever built. You're 32 years old, I said, as if age were a shield strong enough to protect me. And you're 52. Which means you have approximately 3 decades of wisdom I desperately need. Think of it as mentorship with benefits. That's appalling. You're smiling. I was smiling. God help me, I was smiling. If this story is hitting you in the heart, drop a comment telling me if you think Catherine should give Ethan a chance. Your comments fuel these stories, and I read every single one. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan Cole dismantled my resistance with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. He called every evening at 8 o'clock, never earlier, never later, as if he understood that a woman who'd lived alone as long as I had needed predictability before she could handle surprise. Our conversations lasted hours. We talked about architecture and anatomy, about the structural similarities between buildings and bodies, about the way both could be beautiful and broken and rebuilt. He sent me photographs of interesting doorways he passed on his walks through New Haven. Thought of you, the captions would say. Just that. Nothing more. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me. I sent him photographs of trees. He never asked why. He just started noticing trees everywhere, sending me back photos of oaks and maples and birches with commentary that ranged from the botanical to the absurd. This elm outside the hospital looks like it's judging me. Please advise architecturally. But beneath the banter, there was a current of something serious, a connection forming that terrified me with its depth and speed. We talked about his parents' divorce when he was 12, how it had taught him that love was temporary and dangerous, and how he'd spent his 20s proving that theory by never staying with anyone longer than a few months. We talked about my marriage at 25 to a man named Daniel, a good man, a kind man, who'd left me at 33 because he said loving me was like trying to hug a porcupine. I'd never forgiven myself for that either. You collect guilt like some people collect stamps, Ethan said during one late-night call. Impressive collection, but ultimately pointless. Guilt serves a purpose. So does an appendix, technically. Doesn't mean it won't kill you if you let it. Did you just compare my emotional complexity to a vestigial organ? I compared it to an organ that can literally poison you from the inside. I thought it was apartment. 3 weeks after the wedding, he asked me to dinner. A real dinner. Not a phone call, not a text exchange, but sitting across from each other at a restaurant like two people testing whether the electricity between them was real or imagined. I said yes before my brain could veto my heart. He chose a small Italian place in New Haven, candlelit, intimate, with the owner named Rosa who clearly adored him. When I walked in, he stood up from the table, and the look on his face when he saw me made every hour I'd spent choosing my outfit worth it. I wore a simple black dress, my hair down, minimal jewelry. I'd stared at myself in the mirror for 20 minutes before leaving, confronting every line, every mark of time, every evidence that I was 2 decades older than the man waiting for me. "You look incredible," he said, and the way he said it, low and reverent, not performative but genuine, made my breath catch. "You clean up well yourself, Dr. Cole. Please, call me Ethan." Dr. Cole is who I am when I'm wrist deep in someone's chest cavity. Very different vibe. Romantic imagery. Truly. I've been told my bedside manner needs work. We sat. We ordered. Rosa brought bread and olive oil and a bottle of wine she insisted was on the house for Ethan's special lady, which made him blush for the first time since I'd known him. I filed that away as a weapon for future use. Over pasta and candlelight, the playful armor dropped, and we talked about real things. I told him about the years after Daniel left, the loneliness that calcified into independence, the way I'd built my company as a fortress against vulnerability. He told me about the night a teenager died on his table, and he'd gone home and sat in the shower for an hour because he didn't know how else to process it. "We're both running from something," he said. "Maybe we're running toward something," I said, and surprised myself with the honesty of it. After dinner, we walked along the green. The night was warm, the streetlights casting golden pools on the sidewalk. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it, and the simple act of his fingers interlacing with mine sent a current through me that I hadn't felt in decades. "People are staring," I said. "People stare at beautiful things. It's involuntary. They're staring because I look like your mother." "My mother is a 5'2" redhead who exclusively wears Crocs. You look nothing like my mother. You know what I mean." He stopped walking and turned to face me. The streetlight behind him made a halo of his dark hair, and his green eyes were serious for once, stripped of humor and defense. "Catherine, I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it. Not deflect it with a joke, not rationalize it away with math. Can you do that?" "I can try. I'm falling in love with you. Not because you're beautiful, though you are. Not because you're brilliant, though you are. I'm falling in love with you because when I'm with you I feel like I can stop performing. I can stop being the charming surgeon, the witty guy, the man who uses humor to keep everyone at a safe distance. With you I just want to be honest. And that terrifies me. Because honesty is how people get hurt." I stood there in the warm night air, and I felt the last wall crack. Not crumble, not yet, but crack. And through that crack light poured in, and it was golden and terrifying and beautiful. "Ethan," I said, "I'm 20 years older than you. I know. People will judge us. Let them. You'll want children someday. Maybe. Maybe not. That's a conversation for the future, not a barrier for the present. I'm difficult. I'm guarded. I will push you away at least 12 more times before I'm able to fully let you in." 13, he said. "I'm budgeting for at least 13. Kissed him. Right there on the New Haven Green, under the stars and the streetlights and the judgment of absolutely no one who mattered. I kissed him and he kissed me back with a tenderness that unraveled me, his hands cradling my face like I was something precious, something worth holding carefully. When we pulled apart, he pressed his forehead against mine. "For the record," he whispered, "that was the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I've successfully reattached a severed hand. Your romantic benchmarks need recalibration." My romantic benchmarks are exactly where they should be. But happiness, I'd learned, has a way of attracting storms. 3 days after that kiss, I received a phone call that turned my blood to ice. The voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in 17 years. Smooth, controlled, venomous. "Hello, Catherine. Did you miss me?" Richard Hale was out of prison. He'd served 15 of his 20-year sentence and had been released on good behavior. And the first thing he'd done with his freedom was call the woman who'd helped put him there. "I've been thinking about you for 15 years, he said. "Lots of time to think in prison. And I've come to a conclusion." "What do you want, Richard?" "What I've always wanted. What you took from me. My reputation. My career. My life." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And those photographs from Boston still exist, Catherine. Digital copies. Multiple locations. How would your clients feel about them?" How would your little boyfriend feel? My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. How do you know about? I know everything. I've had people watching you since the day I went in. Did you think prison walls stop information? Did you think you could destroy me and walk away clean? I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself. You cut corners and people died. 3 people. 3 insignificant people in a building I didn't even design. A 4-year-old boy, Richard. His name was Marcus. I don't care about names. I care about justice. And justice, Catherine, is about to arrive at your doorstep. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, and the walls I'd been carefully dismantling, the walls Ethan had been gently helping me lower, slammed back into place with the force of a blast door. Because this was what happened when you let people in. You gave them access to the soft parts, the vulnerable parts, and the world used those parts against you. I didn't call Ethan that night. Or the next night. Or the next. By the 4th day he showed up at my door. You're doing the thing, he said, standing on my porch in his scrubs, still wearing his hospital badge, clearly having driven straight from a shift. The pushing away thing. I budgeted for 13, remember? Ethan, you need to leave. Tell me why. Because being near me is dangerous. Because there are things about my past you don't know. I know about Boston, he said quietly. Aunt Dorothy's investigator was thorough. Whatever happened there, I don't care. I stared at him. You know. I know enough. And I know it doesn't change who you are. Richard Hale is out of prison. He has those photos. He's going to destroy me. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. The charming, witty surgeon disappeared, and what emerged was steel. Cold, focused surgical steel. Let him try, Ethan said. Let him try, Catherine. Because he'll have to go through me first. Over the next month, everything escalated. Richard Hale launched a systematic campaign to destroy my reputation. Anonymous tips to architectural journals suggesting my early designs were plagiarized. Whispered rumors to clients about my personal life. A threatening letter delivered to my office with no return address. He was dismantling my life brick by brick, the same way I'd helped dismantle his. But Ethan refused to leave my side. He hired a lawyer, a former federal prosecutor named Sarah Chun who had a reputation for being utterly ruthless and absolutely brilliant. He coordinated with the police. He showed up at my office every evening with takeout and determination and the stubborn refusal to let me face this alone. You don't have to do this, I told him one night, after a particularly devastating day when 2 major clients had pulled their contracts. You're right. I don't have to. I want to. There's a difference. Why? Why would you want this mess? You could be with someone your own age, someone without baggage, someone who doesn't come with a vengeful ex-business associate, and a folder of compromising photographs. He set down his chopsticks and looked at me across my kitchen table. When I was 26, I lost a patient on the table. 8-year-old girl hit by a drunk driver. I couldn't save her. And I stood in that operating room afterward and I thought, this is it. This is the moment I quit. This is too much pain. No one should have to carry this much pain. He paused. And then her mother found me in the hallway, and she hugged me and she said, "Thank you for trying." And I realized that the pain wasn't the point. The trying was the point. Loving you is the same. It's hard and it's messy and it hurts sometimes. But the trying is the point. I crossed the kitchen and sat in his lap and wrapped my arms around his neck and held him so tightly I could feel his heartbeat against mine. And I thought, this is what I've been missing. This is what I've been punishing myself for wanting. This is what Dorothy Webb was giving me permission to have. The resolution came not with a dramatic courtroom scene but with quiet, devastating precision. Sarah Chun discovered that Hale's threats constituted criminal harassment and witness intimidation, violations of his parole. The photographs from Boston, which I dreaded for 17 years, turned out to be evidence of nothing scandalous at all. I'd been at a conference. I'd had too much to drink. I'd been photographed leaving a hotel bar with a married colleague. Nothing had happened between us, but the optics were damning, and Hale had used them as leverage, threatening to fabricate a narrative that would destroy both my reputation and the colleague's marriage. When Sarah presented the evidence to Hale's parole officer, Combined with documentation of his harassment campaign, his threats, his surveillance operation, Richard Hale was arrested and returned to prison to serve the remainder of his original sentence plus additional charges. The day it happened, I sat in my living room with Ethan, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 17 years. Free. Not just from Hale. From the guilt. From the fear. From the prison of my own making that had kept me isolated and alone, and convinced that I deserved nothing better. How do you feel? Ethan asked. Like I've been holding my breath for 17 years and I finally exhaled. Good. Because I have something I need to ask you, and I prefer you conscious for it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart started hammering. Ethan. Before you say anything about age or timing or the statistical improbability of a trauma surgeon and an architect building a life together, let me say this. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond set in a platinum band. I whispered a proposal on a dance floor 3 months ago. I meant it then and I mean it now. Catherine Ellison, will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you deserve every good thing you've been denying yourself? You're insane. Is that a yes? Yes, you're insane. Catherine. I looked at the ring. I looked at the man. I looked at the 17 years of loneliness and guilt and walls and fear, and I watched them dissolve like morning fog in sunlight. Yes, I said. It's a yes. He slid the ring onto my finger and it fit perfectly, and he kissed me with the kind of tenderness that rebuilds broken things. And I thought about Dorothy Webb's letter, about the permission she'd given me, about the 4-year-old boy who loved dinosaurs and chocolate ice cream, about the choices we make and the guilt we carry and the moment we finally set it all down and choose to live. We were married 4 months later in a small ceremony in the garden of the Whitfield estate, under the same fairy lights where we'd first danced. Sophia was my maid of honor. Diana cried through the entire ceremony. Rosa catered the reception and refused payment. Ethan's parents, divorced for 20 years, sat together in the front row and held hands for the first time since he was 12. When we danced our first dance as husband and wife, Ethan leaned in and whispered in my ear. I have another proposal, he said. Already. Let's plant a tree. In the garden of whatever house we build together. For Marcus. I pressed my face against his neck and cried the last tears I would ever cry for guilt. These were tears of gratitude, of love, of the profound and humbling realization that life gives you exactly what you need, sometimes in the form of a man 20 years younger who whispers impossible things on dance floors. We planted that tree the following spring. A magnolia. It grows in our garden now, reaching higher every year. Its roots deepening into soil that holds our love and our losses and our beginning. Sometimes I sit beneath it with Dorothy's letter in my lap, and I read her words again. Permission to forgive yourself. Permission to live. Permission to love. I'm 53 now. My husband is 33. People still stare sometimes. Let them. Let them see a woman who spent 17 years in the dark and found the courage to step into the light. Let them see a man who uses humor as armor, but takes it off for the woman he loves. Let them see 2 imperfect people who chose each other not despite their scars but because of them. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to forgive yourself, to open your heart, to take a chance on love that the world says shouldn't work, then share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Like this video if you believe love doesn't have an expiration date. Subscribe if you want more stories that remind you that the bravest thing you'll ever do is let someone in. And remember this. The walls you build to protect yourself are the same walls that keep love out. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is let them fall. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And thank you for believing, even for just 20 minutes, in the kind of love that changes everything.